Hello friends, welcome to Insights ICANN initiative. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the India-Sri Lanka issue. You know that students, Sri Lankan president is in the visit of the India. In this aspect, we will discuss about the India-Sri Lanka initiative. So before we discuss about further, first we will try to do the syllabus mapping. It is related to Gender Studies paper 2, that is International Relations, as well as if you belong to the PSI or optional, it is relevant to the optional also, especially in paper 2B, India and Neighborhood Relations. Now we will see what we are going to discuss in the video. In this video, these following components we are going to discuss. First, what are the main areas which are going to be discussed between the Sri Lankan President and Indian Prime Minister. That means, why this news? Why India-Sri Lanka relations? Now it is in news. Especially the issue of Kachchatheevu Island. Okay, why it is in news? Kachchatheevu Island. Next, we will discuss about the problems facing by the Indian fishermen and the agreement which was made between the India and Sri Lanka in 1974. And Tamilians in Sri Lanka, what kind of problems they are facing. In that context, we will discuss about the 13th Amendment, and we will discuss about the why Sri Lanka is very important to India and why India is important to Sri Lanka. Then we will discuss finally what are the common platforms sharing by both India and Sri Lanka, and some defense exercise also between India and Sri Lanka we will discuss, and we will conclude this with the way forward. Okay. Before we start this topic, first let us see the boundaries between the India and Sri Lanka. You know the students, Sri Lanka and India, we are sharing the maritime boundary. That means ocean. Okay. So maritime boundary. It is separated by Park Strait. Park Strait, students. And if you look at further, this is India and this is Sri Lanka. The northernmost part of the Sri Lanka, Jaffna, and the Park Strait, which is separating the Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean. Here you will find the Gulf of Mannar. You know students, even we have this Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve also we have. Gulf of Mannar Biosphere also we have. If you recall, tell me students, Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve, very popular for one aquatic animal. Recollect, what is that aquatic animal? Put in your comments. Okay, so fine. Then this is the Gulf of Mannar, and here you will able to see that Kachchatheevu Island. Kachchatheevu Island is somewhat present between the Rameshwaram and Talaimannar. Even you can see here some virtual dotted line. That is the India-Sri Lanka maritime boundary line. Okay, India-Sri Lanka maritime boundary line. It is a virtual line because you cannot draw exactly the line in the ocean. Same like LAC, line of actual control between the India and ocean. It was also kind of an imaginary line. This is also the imaginary line. Why I am mainly emphasis it as an imaginary line? Because Indian fishermen, without knowing this, without recognizing this boundary, they are frequently entering into the Sri Lankan water, and they are being detained by the Sri Lankan authorities. Now let us see our focused area, that is about the Kachchatheevu issue. Now you know the students where this Kachchatheevu is present. Now in this context we will see India-Sri Lanka relations. India-Sri Lanka relations. Relations. In the context of Sri Lankan President visit to India, Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, they given representation to our Prime Minister on various issues. Of those various issues, these three are very important in nature. Number one, Kachchatheevu Island. Regarding this, they given representation Tamil Nadu government. And the second one is regarding the illegal detention of Tamil fishermen or Indian fishermen. Okay, illegal detention of Tamil fishermen. And finally, Sri Lankan government, okay, is requesting that Sri Lankan Tamilians, Sri Lankan Tamilians, Sri Lankan Tamilians who are living in mainly in northern part of the Sri Lanka, their rights must be protected. Their rights must be protected. These are the main demands, students. Now, we will discuss systematically. First, Kachchatheevu Island. For your better understanding, this Kachchatheevu Island till 1974, it belonged to India, and in 1976, okay, one more agreement made between the India and Sri Lanka. With 1974 and 1976 agreements, with these two agreements, Katchatheevu Island went on the other side of the India-Sri Lanka maritime boundary line. That means it went towards the Sri Lankan side. That means traditionally in this area, Indian fishermen used to fish. Now they lost the fishing rights. In spite of that, Indian fishermen were allowed to dry their fishing nets, and they are also allowed to participate in the annual festival of the St. Anthony's festival. Okay, that means Indian fishermen were not allowed to fish, but they were allowed to dry their fishing nets. But later, after the Sri Lankan civil war was ended, now the Sri Lankan government, they amended the Fisheries Act in Sri Lanka. According to that, any illegally caught this fishing equipment by the Sri Lankan authorities, that will be nationalized. That means Indian fishermen's boats or any equipment which is confiscated by the Sri Lankan authorities, now that will be nationalized. That means we cannot get that equipment back. Because of that, so many fishermen's economic livelihood is being affected. This is the first thing. And Tamil Nadu government is requesting Indian government to retrieve this Katchatheevu Island. Okay, get back this Katchatheevu Island. So our fishermen will again, they'll enjoy their traditional fishing rights. Second one, illegal detention of fishermen. So when our Indian fisherman is crossing this India-Sri Lanka international maritime boundary line, as I mentioned earlier, it is very imaginary one. So without knowing the boundary, and there were no safeguards also to identify the boundary line, no patrolling and everything. So because of that, very frequently they are going to the Sri Lankan waters, and Sri Lankan authorities are detaining them and they are harassing them. It is also one of the painstaking issue of this Tamilians. And finally, Sri Lankan Tamilians. You know, students, Sri Lankan Tamilians, as I mentioned earlier, they are much living in the northern provinces. Like how we given special protection to previously Jammu Kashmiri people in the form of Article 370, now the tribal people in the form of Schedule 5, Schedule 6. In the same way, Tamilians who are living in Sri Lanka, they given special provisions in the form of the 13th Amendment. Now Tamil government is requesting that the special rights should be implemented very effectively to the Tamilians who are living in Sri Lanka. Actually, how Tamilians ended up in Sri Lanka, we have to go way back to the Cholas. You know that students, Cholas were popularly known as Imperial Cholas. Okay, they conquest the Sri Lanka. In that conquest, some of the Tamilians, they ended up in Sri Lanka. That is how this Tamilians' life started in the Sri Lanka. Even that issue, that means the protection of Tamilians in Sri Lanka issue, that resulted to the India-Sri Lanka peace accord. After that, it resulted to sending of Indian peacekeeping force to Sri Lanka. Later, the decision did not give positive results, and even that led to the assassination of the Rajiv Gandhi. Okay, we know that. Now we will go back to the context. What is the context, students? Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe, he arrived in Delhi for 2-day visit, and Tamil Nadu Chief Minister urging that this Kachchatheevu Island, India should take back. Kachchatheevu Island, already I mentioned, it is present in Park Strait. Previously, it was held by India and Sri Lanka jointly. In 1974 and 1976, through these two agreements, this administration as well as the fishing rights in that particular island completely controlled by Sri Lanka, 74 and 76. And through these subsequent agreements, 74-76, we also identified international maritime boundary line. So previously, this Kachchatheevu island, it was allowed by the Sri Lanka for the peaceful purpose, okay, such as Indians can dry their fishing nets and everything. But after the civil war broken out in 1983, after that, they were not allowed any sort of activity from Indians. And even after the civil war was ended, Sri Lankan government, they amended the Fishermen's Act. According to that, whatever the equipment they confiscated, it is being nationalized. Next, the issue of Kachchatheevu Island, already I explained this entire thing. And one more thing, Sri Lankan government. So why they are not allowing Indians in the area of Kachchatheevu? Sri Lankan government is arguing that Indian fishermen, they are using the mechanized trawling, bottom trawling. Bottom trawling means it completely sweeping the bottom of the ocean, bottom trawling. If you look at here, Sri Lankans boat capacity, engines 2 cylinders, Indians one 6 to 8 cylinders, and weight 3.5 tons. That is Sri Lankan fishing boat. Indian one 11 tons. Okay, so because of the Indian fishing technique is so advanced compared to Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan people, Sri Lankan fishermen, they are on the losing side. Because of that, Sri Lankan government is also experiencing a lot of pressure, and they are putting a lot of severe restrictions on the Indian fishermen students, especially due to mechanized bottom trawlers. Mechanized bottom trawlers. This is Sri Lankan government view. And India is also urging that the international maritime boundary line should be demarcated, should be clearly visible. Otherwise, very frequently, fishermen from the both sides, they cross and they will be detained by these police officials. Next, problems faced by the Indian fishermen, already we covered regarding the Kachchatheevu Islands. And India is demanding that regular patrolling must be there across the international maritime boundary line. Clear communication system must be there between the officials of the two nations. And very regularly, joint talks, joint working group talks have to be conducted very regularly between the two nations. Because these kind of activities will bring confidence building measures between the two nations. India-Sri Lanka relations, if we now we focus India-Sri Lanka relations in general. India-Sri Lanka relations, it go back to so many centuries old, around 2500 years back. So we are sharing the common intellectual, ethnic and cultural and religious linguistic interaction. You know the students, Ashoka also sent his daughter and son to spread the Buddhism in Sri Lanka and other neighborhood nation. If you are able to remember, tell me the name of the Ashoka's son as well as his daughter who was sent to Sri Lanka to expand the Buddhism in Sri Lanka. You know the students, in Sri Lanka, some of the texts such as Deepavamsha, Mahavamsha, they have the reference regarding the Mauryan Empire. That is also one of the literary source regarding the Mauryan Empire. In recent years, we are giving much emphasis to Sri Lanka in terms of promoting India's security concerns or security interest in Indian Ocean. You know the students, China is promoting the maritime Silk Route. To counter the China, obviously, we should have good relation with the Sri Lanka. As a part of that, we are building a port in Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. Whereas the China is building Hambantota port as well as the Colombo ports. As I mentioned earlier, India, as a part of its Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, as well as the neighborhood first policy. By using these two policies, we are giving much emphasis to the Sri Lanka. Political relations. As I mentioned earlier, in 1983, India was drawn into the conflict between the Sinhalese as well as the Tamilians in Sri Lanka. That resulted to 1987 India-Sri Lanka Peace Agreement, which was mediated by the Rajiv Gandhi. According to this agreement, India sent Indian peacekeeping force to Sri Lanka. Later they were withdrawn. But the Tamilians in Sri Lanka, they understood, they got the perception that Indian forces much helped to Sri Lankan or Sinhalese forces rather than to the Tamilians. Because of that, to take the revenge on Indian forces, they done the assassination of the Rajiv Gandhi. You know the students, last year, Rajiv Gandhi, whoever the people involved in the Rajiv Gandhi assassination, they were released by the Supreme Court by using Article 142 for doing the complete justice. For doing complete justice, Perarivalan and rest of the 6 members, they were released from the jail. You might have known that. Later, civil war was broken out in Sri Lanka and the civil war ended in 2009. Okay, the civil war was broken in 1983. It ended in 2009 with the killing of the Prabhakaran. Prabhakaran led this Tamil Ilam. Okay, Tamil Ilam. Okay, liberation of Tamil, liberation tigers of Tamil Ilam. LTTE. As after Prabhakaran was killed, this LTTE lost its relevance. And of course, India supported lot of resolution against Sri Lanka, because in Sri Lanka, India believed that lot of human rights violations are going against the Tamilians in Sri Lanka. India supported those resolutions against Sri Lanka. But later, in 2014 onwards, after the government changed in Sri Lanka, India-Sri Lanka relations started improving. In 2015, then President Ranil Wickremesinghe, at that time also, then Prime Minister, he visited India. Later, 2019, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the first one to visit the northern provinces of the Sri Lanka, where we shown empathy towards the people who lost their life majorly, who destroyed their life majorly in the civil war, and we pledged that we will help in certain way. Apart from this, India and Sri Lanka, we are having some common defense operations such as SLINX, it is a joint navy exercise, Dosti, navy exercise, trilateral navy exercise between the India, Sri Lanka and Maldives, and we have joint military exercise that is known as Mitra Shakti. This is regarding the defense point of view. And these are the platforms, common platforms which are sharing by both India and Sri Lanka. They are SARC, BIMSTEC and IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. These are the common platforms. And major issues between the India and Sri Lanka are, sometimes Sri Lankan actions are towards the China, pro-China. China is expanding its influence in Sri Lanka, especially as I mentioned earlier, Hambantota as well as Colombo ports and the fishermen issue. And sometimes Sri Lanka is perceiving that India is unnecessarily involving in the Sri Lankan internal affairs. That is, Sri Lanka is against the India's big brother attitude. The way forward is, so we should not interfere in the internal politics of the Sri Lanka. Of course, after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi onwards, India is not much showing interest in the internal politics of another country. Then whatever the developmental assistance we promised, that must be released very soon. And finally, this whoever the refugees in India who came from Sri Lanka during the civil war, they should be peacefully repatriated into Sri Lanka, and both the nations should make initiative in such a manner that the confidence building measures should be activated in both nations. Yesterday's video question: what is the purpose of Rule 267 in Rajya Sabha? The answer is B, suspension of rules. Rules will be suspended, and whatever the thing you are discussing in the motion, that will be taken up for the discussion. Next question: consider the following pairs: Catalonia, Crimea, Mindanao and Oromia. Which of the pairs are given are correctly matched? Correctly matched pairings are what with respect to their country? Mains question: India's neighborhood first policy and Sri Lanka's India first approach had to encounter a number of composite problems. That means a lot of problems are there in these policies, which eventually shaped present day relations. Analyze. That means how India-Sri Lanka relations are shaped up with the help of these two policies. This is the mains question, students. As we reach to the end of this video, we will briefly revise what we discussed in this video. In this video, we discussed about what the Tamil Nadu government mainly demanding, that is around 3 issues, and why the issue of Kachchativu island came up, and the issue regarding the international maritime boundary line. Then, what are India's concerns? What are the agreements in 1974 and 1976? And some other areas of cooperation like military exercise, as well as the common platform sharing by both nations, and India's concern with respect to Sri Lanka. These are the ones we discussed. So this is the detailed analysis regarding the Kachchativu issue between the India and Sri Lanka.